We are now in the period in the Jewish calendar known as Bein HaMetzarim, the 3 weeks of mourning between the fast of the 17th of Tammuz and the 9th of Av, during which times both temples were destroyed and the Jewish people were exiled to all of the corners of the globe. And our sages tell us that the reason why the second temple was destroyed and the people were exiled by the Romans was because mainly of one sin, sinat chinam, causeless hatred and bickering between the Jewish people, which was brought about by gossip and slander and abusive language. And we very often underestimate the power of words. But words indeed are very powerful. And at the beginning of this week's double parasha, Matot-Masei, the Torah teaches us just how powerful words are. It speaks of the concept of a neder, of taking a vow and an oath. And what this means is that God gave to the Jewish people the power to create new prohibitions. There are 365 prohibitions in the Torah, but a Jewish person can create a new prohibition for themselves. They can take a vow and an oath and they can say, I vow that I'm never going to eat chocolate again, or I'm never going to eat chocolate for the next 30 days. And that becomes binding upon them. And if they go ahead and they eat the chocolate, they are in fact violating the Torah, even though the Torah says you're allowed to eat chocolate. But they, through their words alone, have created a whole new concept, a whole new prohibition. This teaches us the power of speech. And this is something that in our era, many of the great rabbis have tried to emphasize. That just as the temple was destroyed because of the power of speech, the negative power of speech, the only way we can rebuild it is with the positive power of speech, is to avoid lashon hara, slander, gossip, hurtful words, and to study the laws of the famous Chofetz Chaim, who spent a great deal of his life composing an encyclopedia on these laws to teach us just what can be said and what can't be said, how to use your words to lift people up rather than to lower them. And in fact, the source of all of the suffering goes back to words, the words of the spies. When the spies that were sent out by Moshe to scout out the land came back with their devastating report, they didn't do any violent act, they just spoke. They said it was a land that consumes its inhabitants, a land that is terribly fortified. They frightened everybody just with their words. With their words alone, they created panic. And the Jewish people had to stay in the wilderness for 40 years. And the day that they spoke was Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av. And therefore, for all time, that negative energy was placed into that day. And instead, we should use our words to lift people up, to make them feel like better people. And there's an incredible story about the Chofetz Chaim. Chofetz Chaim, as we know, was one of the most pious people that lived in the last century. And he was a small man, and he was a modest man, but he was a great person. He was a giant of a person. And he had the most gentle way of speaking. And he was a rabbi, although he never had an official position, in a small little hamlet, a shtetl in Lithuania called Radin. And there he had a yeshiva. And unfortunately, one of the bochrim in the yeshiva, one of the students, had begun to violate Shabbat. And the Rosh Yeshiva wanted to expel the student from the yeshiva. He was becoming a bad influence on all of the other boys. And this boy was sent to the Chofetz Chaim. Chofetz Chaim was with them maybe a minute or two, and that boy came out transformed. He was a different person. For the rest of his life, he remained an observant Jew, and he never desecrated Shabbat again. No one knew what the Chofetz Chaim had said to that young man. It was a private matter. Until many years passed, and a certain rabbi was delivering a lecture, and he said, I really wish I knew what the Chofetz Chaim had said during that short little audience. And an old man stood up and had said, I was that young boy. And let me tell you what happened. I came in there, and there was the Chofetz Chaim. He was a short little man, and I was 16 years old, but I was already taller than him. And he took my hands in his hands, and they were warm. And he looked me in the eyes, and he began to cry. And he said, Shabbos Kodesh. He said, the holy Shabbat. That's all he said. But when I looked in his eyes, I saw two things. I saw an incredible love that he had for me. And I also saw the pain that he felt that a Jew, and especially a yeshiva bocher, could break Shabbat. And I realized at that moment that I could never cause this man any more pain. And therefore I took upon myself that I was going to keep Shabbos for the rest of my life. That's all the Chofetz Chaim needed to say. Just to hold his hands and to say, Shabbat Kodesh, the holy Shabbat. And he lifted that young boy up. Maybe another person would have said, you Shabbos desecrator, you evil person, you wicked person, get out of the yeshiva. But the Chofetz Chaim knew how to use his words, even just a few words, to lift a person up. And that's what we should do to rectify all of the sins that have come before us in this time. If we want to see the rebuilding of the Beit HaMikdash, we have to use our positive power of speech. I wish you a Shabbat Shalom.